Welcome to Politics and Psychology. Today we are discussing how your emotions are being manipulated in the news, on the headlines, and in social media. And this is being done in a very sneaky kind of way through subconscious mechanisms. And this is by the size of the font that's being used, grammar or punctuation, and word choice. So let's start with the size of the font. Have you noticed recently how most of the headlines or the social media descriptions, especially in YouTube, how the titles are in all capital letters? Well, when you use all capital letters, then you are emphasizing a strong emotion, a strong thought, or something to which you want to focus or direct people to pay attention to and to pay a high level of attention to. So think back for a moment when someone sent you a text message and it had all caps in it. So what did you feel? What was the first thought about the emotional tone of that text message? Or what about if they sent you an email and the email was in all capital letters? Usually you would think that that person was yelling at you, that they were displaying an intense emotion of being either very angry or very excited. So when we see a word or a phrase in all capital letters, then we are subconsciously alerted that this is a very intense message, a very important message, or a very emotional message. So all capital letters are a signifying of importance and strong or strength of that message. And let me just give you a little nerd side note about capital letters. So the reason why we call capital letters uppercase and the non-capitalized lowercase goes back to when we were doing printing on the newspapers and they were using the metal stamps. And so the way that they divided the letters, they would put them all like in these metal stamps and they would use that to make a word. And so the letters that were cut out, these metal stamps, all the ones that were in the larger cap were at the uppercase of this wooden shelf, and the ones that were not in that larger font were in the lowercase of that wooden shelf. So when they said, oh, hey, I'm going to write the word Nixon, then they would know to go to the uppercase of that wooden shelf for the capital N for Nixon, and then go to the lowercase of that wooden shelf for the rest of Nixon's name. So I thought that was very interesting. So now let's look at the punctuation marks that are used. We're already familiar with the exclamation mark, and in some places it's called exclamation point, but I'll say exclamation mark today. So in its name, it already tells you that it is exclaiming something. It is marking an exclamation to emphasize what was said or written. And to exclaim means that you are emphasizing, again, strong feelings or emotions about something or someone. So when we see an exclamation mark, we have already been taught in elementary school that that statement being made is one of strong emotion or strong conviction of thought. Let's look at the question mark. This is also another very familiar punctuation mark that we already learned in school. And this one helps us understand if a sentence or a phrase is someone making a statement or asking a question. So, and for example, let's say I'm texting you right now and I write, I love chocolate, and I end it with a period. Ending with the punctuation of a period lets you know I was just making a statement. But if I used a question mark for that same sentence in my text message to you, then you would think I was asking you a question. It would sound like, I love chocolate, question mark. And that would trigger you to then explain yourself or to help me understand myself. But what if I used an exclamation mark instead of a question mark? That would give it a completely different meaning for my text to you. I love chocolate, exclamation mark, is letting you know I have a strong love or a strong preference for chocolate. And of course, if you've been listening to me for at least 2 episodes, you already know that it would be an exclamation mark for me. But in many of the YouTube titles and the social media posts that you will see, there is a punctuation mark not only being used, but being used multiple times. So if we continue with the I love chocolate exclamation mark, and then we use double exclamation marks, it would say I love chocolate exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And it's those double exclamation marks that let you know that I am making a very intense statement. Now let's examine the size of the font with a punctuation mark. So if I texted I love chocolate and the word chocolate is in all caps and with an exclamation mark at the end, then you will subconsciously perceive two things. One, what I prefer, and two, the strength of my preference. And you can perceive what I prefer because I'm emphasizing the word chocolate by putting it in all caps. You can also perceive the strength of my preference for chocolate because I'm putting an exclamation mark at the end of that sentence. And if I added all caps to chocolate and used double punctuation marks, then my text will say, I love chocolate, chocolate in all caps, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And then this lets you perceive not only my strong feelings, but also my strong preference. Not only how I feel, but also what I want. So today we're only talking about chocolate, and that's nothing major, it's nothing traumatic. But what about if we use the same technique of using all capital letters and punctuations in our news headlines? Seeing this will intensify your subconscious expectation of what that news or that social media post will be about. Just by changing the sizing of a font and adding in a punctuation mark in that news header can influence the emotions of a reader or the emotions of a viewer. And so what they're doing is using these combination of size of the font or capitals or lowercase, and then the punctuation mark, and that's how they are using it to trigger your emotions. For example, imagine a news headline that says, Dr. Carr loves chocolate, exclamation mark. That news headline will elicit from you a different emotional reaction than if the headline was written with Dr. Carr loves chocolate, question mark, or even if that headline was Dr. Carr loves chocolate, question mark, question mark. So there will be a different emotional response depending on what's capitalized and what punctuation mark is used and how many punctuation marks were used. There will also be a different emotional response if the word love was in all capital letters instead of the word chocolate. So that would sound like Dr. Carr loves chocolate with loves in all capital letters. So you would also get a different emotional response if I emphasized a different word or if I emphasized the person's name or title. So if it said Dr. Carr loves chocolate, that might make you think, oh, wow, if it's a doctor that they're emphasizing, this must be something really important or medicinal about chocolate. So let's use a non-emotionally charged word like chocolate, and it won't really affect your emotions either way. But what if we did switch it to an emotional word? What if that word instead of chocolate was sad? And what if we talked about, again, politics? For example, the headline was, the candidate looked sad, period. That type of headline might get your attention, but it won't get your attention as much as if we used a more intense emotional word such as devastated. So instead of saying the candidate looked sad, we changed the headline to the candidate looked devastated. You would have a different emotional response. What if we also added a punctuation mark? The candidate looked devastated, exclamation mark. Or another example is the title for this episode. The word terrifying is already an intense emotional word. So when you change the font size to all caps, terrifying becomes even more intense. And we can increase the intensity of that word even more by adding an exclamation mark after the word terrifying in all caps. So when you see the word terrifying in all caps with an exclamation mark, then you are more likely going to experience a more anxious subconscious reaction than a happy or peaceful one. So when the news intensifies a heading, by increasing the font size, by making the word in all capital letters, plus using a punctuation mark, plus choosing an intense emotional word, then the news is able to quickly trigger your emotions and on a subconscious level. They can trigger your excitement, your anger, or your sadness just by using these headline tricks. So, for the person who sees or reads the headline and has an emotional reaction to it, then it's their emotional reaction that will then cause that person to instantly click on that news headline, that video, or post. It will make the person want to see, well, what was so terrifying or who was so terrified. It will also make them worry about their own safety. And if this quote, terrifying thing has happened to someone, is it going to happen to me? And this is a very common occurrence in today's news. The news outlets are relying less on creativity and writing skill to get your attention, and instead, they're relying on emotional manipulation. They're relying on their ability to manipulate your emotions to make you instantly click on that article or video or to watch that news segment that's about to come up. And they can do all of this without you even knowing that your emotions were triggered. And this is again happening not only in news, but very often in our recent times for political news, especially with the 2024 presidential election. And with this technique being used during a presidential election, not only does it get more clicks, it does more than that. It helps to fuel political division, and it makes subscribers or viewers who are already angry or upset or anxious even more so. And then when that news outlet consistently feeds them that particular type of messaging with a particular type of emotional tone or intensifying it, then that's going to make them have a viewer, subscriber who is completely feeling these things or these emotions with that news outlet constantly. And because they cannot get any type of emotional satisfaction or emotional closure because they keep feeding you the negative part, then they're going to keep on watching that news channel or keep on clicking on that news blog or that YouTube channel because they're looking for having these intense emotions, but I don't know how to get closure to them. So I will keep watching this news so I can get closure, hoping closure will come. And then when it doesn't, I will just continue to watch it. And then that's how they get quote unquote loyal viewers because they're really looking for emotional closure. And that's being triggered by the emotional manipulation by the headline. For example, when we talked a few minutes ago about the candidate looked devastated, exclamation mark. Let's say it's a news channel and that channel heavily favors Democrat voters and politicians. And instead of it saying the candidate looked devastated, it will then read Trump looked devastated, exclamation mark. This would attract the emotions of viewers who want to see Donald Trump lose the 2024 election, or it would feed on the desire to not only see him lose, but to see him experience the intense emotion of devastation. The same would be true if another news channel that favored Republican voters was doing the same thing. If their headline read, Kamala Harris looked devastated, exclamation mark, and with devastated being in all capital letters, then this would likewise attract viewers who want to see Kamala Harris not only devastated, but very devastated. And it's this type of emotional manipulation that encourages negativity both socially and politically. For the person who sees or reads the headline, it reinforces both their unconscious and their subconscious desires to see someone fail politically and be hurt personally. When the newspapers, the channels, and the blogs consistently use intense and negative language to describe one candidate or one political party over another, then this is what adds to the political division. So then to continue this manipulation into making you feel a certain way about one candidate over the other, as well as to continue to get you to watch it because you don't have any emotional closure from them having your emotions all intensified, then they have to then create more news stories with the same type of messaging of negativity or whatever emotion they're trying to elicit against that particular person, against that issue, or against that political party. And they'll continue to create those news messaging in such an extreme way that they are creating opposites. So you have one candidate who is extremely good for our country and the other who is extremely bad. And by creating headlines that creates messaging where candidates are polar opposites, then using language that's polar opposites, such as good and bad, that then feeds even more into the division, because now we don't have any option of someone might just be okay or good on some areas. No, that person is completely good and the other person is completely bad. And this is all done by the extreme language that's used, along with the trick of using the font size and then the punctuation marks. For the news outlets, for example, that favor Trump, then they will use emotional language such as Trump saves or Trump is a hero, while describing Kamala Harris as dangerous or a threat. And the same would be true vice versa for a channel that supported or was in favor of Vice President Kamala Harris. So not only are we using the words that are either positive or negative, but we're creating a consistent positive or consistently negative messaging by just the words alone of one person or one party over the other. And this emotional manipulation is not just limited to the candidates. It also applies to describing events and government policies. For example, if they want you to be against immigration, they will use extreme negative words to describe immigrants. They may put the word murderers and then type murderers in all capital letters and then put an exclamation mark after it. Or what if another channel believes that immigrants add value to the country? Then they would type an emotionally positive word such as innocent or grateful. And then they might use the word innocent with all capital letters or even with an exclamation mark. They might even go as far as using an imagery word, imagery being in your imagination, creating an imagery word to create an emotional picture in your mind. So this would look like using the word innocent. So to intensify the word innocent, they might add the word children and then making the headline innocent children as part of the headlines. And they would probably deliberately use the word children instead of the word adolescents or instead of the word teenagers. So then the headline might be innocent immigrant children are being killed, exclamation mark. So using very intense emotional language combined with font size and punctuation marks to trigger you to subconsciously emotionally react, to then be so caught up into that emotion that you then have a behavior that they can then predict that you will likely click on that if they believe that you are for immigration, or to go past it and then click on another post that's the same level of intensity but in the opposite way where you would be against immigration. Your emotions are also being manipulated using positive wording. And keeping with the political examples, let's look at the Harris-Walz campaign. They are using the words joy and joyful, even joyful warriors. So maybe you're a person who has become sad or hopeless with our political system or our political parties. So with them using the word joy and joy in all capital letters, then this is also manipulating you, because maybe you might be so desperate for change and wanting to be hopeful for something good that you will respond to the word joy and joyful, especially if it's in all capital letters. In our current state of television news, social media news outlets, and blogs, people, though, have become less concerned with providing news and more concerned about monetizing their channels and manipulating their audience. It becomes less about unbiased news and more about promoting the views of the owners of those TV networks, the owners of the newspapers, the lobbyists who are funding or making political donations to that corporation or that blog or even that video channel. So when you have news outlets that are focusing on revenue or their own political agenda, rather than focusing on an unbiased presentation of news, then you're going to see more headlines using emotional manipulation. And they're manipulating you to get you to click on that article, to watch that video, or to like a post. And the danger is not only them monetizing your emotions, but it's that you are then being psychologically affected by this. And it's how that manipulation is triggering your emotions and your subconscious thoughts or desires or even fears in some instances. If you're already thinking in a negative way about a particular political candidate or party, it's going to make you feel more negative if that headline is already negative. And the fact that you have a news channel that you're watching consistently and they're consistently feeding you negative news about one particular person or candidate, then it not only will strengthen your view that this person is indeed negative and not the ideal candidate, but it's the most horrible candidate ever. And then this can lead to subconsciously intensifying your own fears and anxieties. By using extreme language that manipulates your emotions, it can cause a reaction to almost anything, even if it's the word chocolate. So, for example, if that fake article about me with headline said Dr. Carr hates chocolate, hates in all capital letters and with double exclamation marks, and then of course it's me being a doctor on there, it might make you wonder or even worry, like, well, why is this doctor saying that she hates chocolate? And I just had a chocolate cookie bar or a chocolate smoothie a few minutes ago. So now let's take another example. If you're in a safe place, not driving, if you can close your eyes for a moment and imagine a news headline, and that headline has the word salt, but the salt is in all capital letters. Now there's an exclamation mark at the end of the word salt that is in all caps. What are your first feelings in your body seeing the word salt in the news with an exclamation mark, all caps? Do you sense alarm? Do you feel concerned? Or maybe are you intrigued to learn if they're saying something good or something bad about salt? Do you feel anxious? Are you annoyed? So now, let's go ahead and open your eyes if you had your eyes closed. Thank you for participating. This is an experiential example that can let us feel in a very conscious way how the headlines we are being exposed to on a daily basis can create a subconscious physical and subconscious emotional reaction within us, even if it's a word as simple as salt. It also lets us experience how easily just the font size and a punctuation mark can trigger our thoughts and our feelings and ultimately trigger our behavior to click on that post, which in turn gets revenue for the news channel or the outlet that just manipulated you. So with this political election year, try not to be manipulated by the news and try not to let your vote be manipulated by media outlets that are focusing on manipulating your emotions or monetizing your emotions. And one way you can do this is by recognizing if a news channel consistently uses capital letters in their headlines. If they're always doing this, then they are actively trying to manipulate your emotions as a viewer. Pay attention to the word that they capitalize, and the word will reveal the emotion that they are trying to manipulate within you. Also pay attention to the emotional category of the words that they are most often using and putting in all capital letters. Do they usually use a negative word and a negative word in all caps for one particular person, one political party, or one particular social issue? If so, you can now tell not only what emotions they are trying to manipulate you to feel, but you can also see the specific way they are trying to control your thinking about that particular person, political policy, or social issue. So going forward, starting today, whenever you see a headline title that uses all capital letters combined with a punctuation mark or multiple punctuation marks, please understand first and foremost that the content of that news is not to inform you, but to manipulate you. Then recognize the attempt of manipulation and make a conscious decision before you click on that news or watch that news for too long or believe the headline. Make a conscious effort to understand that this channel is most likely biased and not focusing on truthful news, but more on what they can get from you viewing that news. They're trying to get you to feel or think in a certain way, and not for your benefit, not for your community or for our country's benefit, but for their own financial benefit or their own political agenda. So that ends our time for today. I just wanted to kind of give you the heads up and the alert to be attentive to the headlines that we're seeing and how there's an increase in the number of words that are being used to subconsciously manipulate you. But I also wanted to give you a quick little interesting fact before we left. So with the use of texting and social media, we can't always tell what a person thinks or what they're feeling or what they want us to think or feel when we see that text message or that social media communication. And this was why in the late 1990s, there was a Japanese engineer and he worked for a Japanese cell phone company and they were focusing on mobile technology. And so he's the one who created emojis. So the emoji in Japanese, the E stands for picture and moji stands for character. So they created pictures and characters, putting those together in a small little cute icon that helps to convey what emotion that they really meant by that exclamation mark or by that heart, or even understanding what LOL meant, because I think for the longest time we thought it meant lots of love. So now we all know what the LOL means and what emoji stands for. And this would also be very helpful to understand the manipulation in social media headlines. So now that you know this interesting fact and the subconscious manipulation tricks that news headlines are using on you and probably your friends and loved ones, please be mindful of this. Make thoughtful decisions, avoid the manipulation, and you could even still watch that same news channel, but just know that they are there to either entertain you and manipulate you and less so on informing you. So again, that ends our time for today, but please inform others, educate them, and continue this conversation using science and love.
And if you run